The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest in the world, and we just happen to live in them. One thing we can tell you, there are ghosts in the mountains. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Ghosts in the Mountains. As always, I am your host, Caleb Hanks, and I am here with the beautiful, the bearded, the majestic, Austin Burgess. Buddy, it's another night of diving into the weird, crazy history and the magic of the realm of Western North Carolina and subsequent areas. How excited are you about this, and how are you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm doing pretty great, and I'm excited. This is a little bit of a slight road trip for us tonight, right? We're going to be taking a slight trip outside of our home in Western North Carolina and dipping a little bit across state lines.
Look, let's not sugarcoat it. We are going to the border of North Carolina, and when we get there, we are going to be pushing on a force field that's going to try to keep us in our realm, but we are going to break through into the majesty of northern Georgia.
Yeah.
Today, we will be talking about a very, very strange and elusive place that can be attributed to all kinds of stuff. There's many places in Western North Carolina where, on one hand, you've got potential Sasquatch. On the other hand, you've got some sort of other relict hominid, UFOs, you name it. And the subject of tonight's episode is another potential paranormal vortex because, well, it kind of has it all. And I lived in Georgia for a very short time, and while I was there, I got to witness this place with my very own eyes, and we were talking about none other than the Tallulah Gorge and the subsequent Tallulah Falls. Austin, dude, as always, I'm sure you have done the ultimate deep dive on this place.
A little bit, yeah. And admittedly, this was not one that was on my radar when we started, kind of mapping out some potential topics for episodes for the podcast. This is not something that I was super familiar with, or I wouldn't say has a really, strong, prominent history in the kind of high strangeness paranormal world. But, as we started diving into some of these areas of high strangeness in Western North Carolina the past few months, man, there's been quite a few synchronicities and references that point back to this Tallulah Falls area.
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say right up front about Tallulah Falls and the Tallulah Gorge is, number one, work up to it with the Stairmaster. Oh my God, if you go all the way down in the gorge to the bottom of the falls, there are so many steps. You are going to be feeling it for sure.
And you got to hike your way back up after that. So
just keep in mind that when you're halfway down, you got to make it all the way back up. But I will say when you get down to the bottom, it is incredibly beautiful up there. One little first thing that I recognized about the falls there, or the gorge in general, was that there was this crazy tightrope walker, and this guy strung a big cord across the Tallulah Gorge there and walked across, and they have like some little information about when this took place. I think it was either in the 70s or the 80s that this happened. And so I was like, okay, well that's starting this off a little strange. But I did not realize just how insanely bizarre it actually got.
Yeah.
Walking across the gorge on a tightrope is one thing, but as we have gone on to find out, it's actually a lot stranger than we could ever really imagine.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's some pretty significant ties back to our home in Western North Carolina. And, one thing I kind of tried to keep in mind is in those pre-colonial times, when the area, specifically the Tallulah Gorge, was inhabited by the Cherokee, there really was no distinction or line between Western North Carolina and North Georgia. So
Yeah.
all kind of the same thing for all intents and purposes of today's episode, at least. I've never personally been to Tallulah Falls, but God, it looks pretty freaking awesome.
Well, you're going soon because
Yeah.
I'm making you, and it's close enough.
Yeah, only a 2-hour drive from here, so might as well be Western North Carolina for that matter.
Yeah, when I would play music in Highlands, North Carolina,
Yep.
You're right there.
Yeah, it's dipped down.
hmm
I've seen it referred to as the Niagara of the South.
I think that's pretty on the nose.
Okay, cool. Yeah, from what I understand and from research I've dove into, the Tallulah Gorge itself is actually this ancient ravine that's depths range from either 200 to 1,200 feet, depending on which part you're in. It's 2 miles long, and widths vary from 200 feet to half a mile across. So this thing's pretty gigantic. And I guess from what I understand, the gorge has been just carved out over these millions of years by the Tallulah River running through that. And the Tallulah Falls itself is actually a series of 6 waterfalls that cascade down through the Tallulah Gorge. So I could understand how that's quite the trek and how that's got to be pretty freaking impressive to see.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the terrain down there is actually, it kind of comes out of nowhere because you don't have a lot of subsequent terrain quite like that. Just kind of, breaking right down through the mountain ridges there. So I was honestly pretty blown away when I went there. And they have a really, really cool visitor center that kind of like spirals down, and it's got this big exhibit in the middle that you kind of walk down around in a circular motion. And they have all these taxidermied versions of the animals that you can find in the area. It's just, total like nature park vibe. Kind of takes me back to when I was a kid and you'd go up to Mount Mitchell and they had that little tiny museum.
Yeah, I think that thing's still there.
Yeah, they've got all those vibes in there.
Nice. So from what I read, the falls actually used to be much stronger until this hydroelectric dam was built there by the Georgia Power Company in 1920. So whatever you're used to witnessing, just imagine that ramped up.
Man.
And I guess from what I understand, the Georgia Power Company worked with the state of Georgia to establish the Tallulah Gorge State Park, which is open to the public today. And I guess they do occasional dam releases where they basically will let that thing flow at full force to kind of let off some pressure from that.
Damn.
So that would be a cool one to go down and see.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
But as I previously mentioned, before the earliest European settlers arrived in this area, it was inhabited by the Cherokee, who referred to the falls itself as Ugini. And they were noted, or the Cherokee in this area were noted for being really welcoming and helpful to the initial white settlers that were moving into this area. So good on them for being good neighbors, and bummer that wasn't reciprocated for y'all.
No doubt.
But the Cherokee really had a lot of stories about the gorge that they would tell these settlers by the time they were moving in the area. And we hear about this being one of the few locations that you could find these ferry crosses that are associated with the Unwi-Junsti, which we kind of spoke about briefly on that episode, specifically in the story of the little people who wore white. But they had a lot of other tales of little people in the gorge that didn't exactly correlate with that little people who wore white tale completely. They believed that there was a cave on the highest side of the gorge that was a door to what they referred to as the happy hunting grounds. And they believed that was the case since everyone who entered that cave never returned. So they must be off happily hunting.
Oh, man.
Without, it's probably a good kind of silver lining way to look at what was probably a pretty dark situation with people not returning from those caves.
No doubt.
But along those same lines, they believed that these Cherokee little people lived in the caves, whether it was the caves or just crevices or even under the waterfalls that were throughout the gorge. But they were reportedly fearful of this group of little people, often avoiding the gorge and falls entirely due to them. This group of little people was noted for being hostile, and especially to really anyone that came close to, approached, or tried to investigate their home in these caves or under the waterfalls. Stories vary from them throwing rocks to even tricking people into falling to their death at the bottom of the gorge. They were also known to kidnap Cherokee children and women. So, as I mentioned, this description's a little bit different from the little people who wore white story, but the description does actually match the little people of the Rock Clan. We went into more detail on the different clans between the Little People. But the Rock Clan specifically were known for being malicious, and they really shared more similarities with some of the European fae and fairy lore, specifically some of the kidnapping.
It makes a lot of sense that the Rock Clan might potentially be down there because that gorge is like rocky as hell, dude.
I mean, that checks out. And, as we mentioned before, when we had the story tied into the Chimney Rock episode with some of those malicious Little People, I think we also found that was safe to assume probably also the Rock Clan there.
Yep.
So as mentioned in the You and We Junesti episode, I really wanted to avoid getting to some of the deeper, more speculative theories, just out of respect for Cherokee tradition. But really with some of the synchronicities around this topic, I don't think we'd be doing this episode justice if we didn't explore it from that perspective.
Absolutely.
So with that being said, I did find quite a few reported UFO sightings directly from the Tallulah Gorge area. And we'll get into those here in a bit. But before we do that, I want to jump back to Mary Joyce's book, The Cherokee Little People Were Real. And in this book, she interviewed various people who were involved in the excavation of land during the construction of Western Carolina University, where these multiple tiny tunnels were found. But in this book, she also interviewed one Eastern Band of Cherokee Indian member who goes by the name of Ruth Youngbird Beck. And she made a pretty interesting comment in her interview that I wanted to share. She says, "Sometimes I think the Little People may have something to do with the UFO situation. So many strange things. History tells us about so many strange things that have no answer. There must have been something else here that was building, like the little caves. Who made the little caves? Who built the Serpent Mound out there in Ohio? There's a lot of stuff that we have no idea how it got there. There's a lot in this world we have no idea about." And, I think normally I would kind of look at this as more of ancient aliens type talking points. But coming directly from an EBCI member, I think it bears a little more weight to me. Just the fact that these people are considering that connection.
Yeah. I'm assuming you've seen, that the serpent out there in Ohio.
The Serpent Mound? Yeah.
That is really bizarre.
It really is. The overhead view of it. Yeah. And there's a lot more similar kind of instances of that. But yeah, the fact that she was aware of that and knows it has, some sort of UFO connections, whether she was just watching something like Ancient Aliens and saw it on there, but at least it kind of sparked her mind to draw these connections between something like that and the legends of the Little People. So the fact that she felt comfortable enough to share that thought in the interview, made me think that maybe it's not that weird to be considering this aspect from more of that UFO point of view and angle. And especially when you consider that infamous ufologist Dr. Alan Greenfield told us that he investigated the Cherokee Little People of the Tallulah Gorge kind of from a ufological perspective back in his day.
Oh, man. I love that dude.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that hearing that there are multiple sightings reported and hearing that some EBCI members are open to the UFO idea, I think that just adds a little bit more credence to what Dr. Greenfield was going and trying to kind of study and discover back in the day. He kind of briefly mentions this expedition in his book, The Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts, in an interview with the mysterious Terry R. Rist, who claimed that one of these cave entrances can actually be seen in the movie Deliverance, which I guess parts were actually filmed in the Tallulah Gorge.
Yeah.
So maybe you can. Maybe we have to rewatch that. Get the pause button ready. Look for some interesting anomalous caves there. Yeah.
Also, if you're ever in the Tallulah Gorge and you hear banjo playing, run.
Right. That's one thing that movie taught us. So Dr. Greenfield told us that he learned about the Little People of the Tallulah Gorge. He actually learned about it in school from growing up in Georgia. And he wanted to explore and investigate them from what I would consider kind of the lens and perspective of the book Passport to Magonia. And if you're not familiar, Passport to Magonia it's a really groundbreaking book by legendary UFO researcher Jacques Vallée that compares modern UFO sightings and contact cases to traditional folklore, mythology, and kind of old world fae lore is what I would describe it as. Vallée suggests that UFO encounters may not be entirely new or even extraterrestrial, but part of a much older phenomenon, one that's appeared throughout history in different forms, from fairy encounters to gods and religious visions. His work reframes UFOs as part of a deeper and possibly interdimensional mystery. So I think if you haven't checked out Passport to Magonia and you're interested in UFOs or folklore and the crossover between the two, this is pretty much your manifesto on getting into the whole interdimensional theory that has kind of become a little bit more popular in recent years.
No doubt.
So I was actually revisiting this book this weekend and quickly noticed there were 2 sections with direct references to UFO sightings that occurred right there in Tallulah Falls area. And what the
What's going on?
Alan Greenfield's calling me.
Really?
Yeah.
He's like, on. Answer it.
We got to pipe him in.
Hold on a second. Greenfield. Oh my God. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. Alan Greenfield.
Okay, girls, put your clothes on. Okay, never mind. Not important right now. Whiteboard. I don't even know what a whiteboard. Whoops, I said. I'm sorry, I said.
You're fine. We started saying a lot more. We just bleep it now because it's funny. Actually, you started that trend on our podcast.
Oh, really? Well, what the?
Anyway, my man, Dr. Greenfield.
Yes, sir. What can I say?
How have you been and what have you been up to, my friend?
Well, I wrote it last year, but I wrote a ritual magic book, which is just coming to print, I'm told.
I found it on Amazon yesterday, so it is in print officially.
Wonderful.
There you go. So, Alan, Caleb and I have really been talking about Tallulah Falls and, some of the connections to the Cherokee Little People. And we know last time we talked, you really kind of spoke some about your personal investigations there. Could you tell us a little more and kind of recap how you officially came across the subject of Tallulah Gorge and specifically the connection to the Cherokee Little People?
Oh, you don't want to know how. Well, maybe I did discuss it in the previous program, but that was the only time I've ever discussed it. I first became aware of, the Tallulah Falls School, which was, may still be for all I know, an Appalachian charity, because that's an extremely impoverished, as much of Appalachia always has been, area. So the Tallulah Falls School was a charity that my 5th and 6th grade classes contributed to. So I was aware, of Tallulah Gorge. And then that poet guy who wrote better poetry than me, but that's not really here or there. Dickey, I think's his name. We'll pass on that. Wrote a book named come on, Alan. Deliverance. Yes. And out of the book came the tale of the trip down the wild Catoosa. But it wasn't really on the wild Catoosa, because that's a hard place to do a film at. It was at Tallulah Gorge in the river there, which was a place of legend among the Cherokee going back to pre-Columbian times or pre-Viking times, or, whoever blundered into this continent after the ice melted.
So where did you first hear these legends of the Little People from the Cherokee lore?
Well, I got it from an ancient tome in my 8th grade This Is Your Georgia class, a book by Bernice McCullough called This Is Your Georgia, because back in the day, they taught history from a Confederate point of view, And if I told you what the world was like back then, you probably wouldn't even believe it. Apartheid doesn't even touch what went on here. But as the case may be, the book had a lot of, among, its standard Confederate version of history, it had a lot of ghost lore in it. And of course, along with ghost lore, there's always the Indian lore from the Cherokee before they voluntarily decided to leave Georgia.
Right.
As the textbooks say.
Jackson assured, sign here. Okay, your chief signed, get out. Okay, we're going. So going back into remote antiquity, among the stories that were in there was the story of a place that the Cherokee, allegedly, according to Bernice McCullough, avoided like the plague they got from the Spanish, but that's another story. They were afraid of the Yumwi Chumdi, which is probably a notable mispronunciation of one or the other of the Cherokee dialects, who were little people in the same sense that leprechauns in Ireland or fairy lore everywhere in the world called various things, were sort of referred to as the good people because you didn't want to piss them off. So apparently the Cherokee had learned that lesson long before the superstitious Europeans came in with their superstitions, right? So they had their own legends that the Yumwi Chumdi came out of a cave in Tallulah Gorge, which then was part of the Tallulah River. There's a dam on it now, so you can go down in the gorge, but it's a very impressive place. And having heard about those stories, among other things that were interesting, I traveled there in search of this alleged cave. I never found it, but there are other people, as you know, who claim to have found their way there to their immense regret, as apparently the Yumwi Chumdi, at least some of them, are cannibalistic and rather inclined towards getting human females for slavery, white slavery purposes, as it used to be called. And all of that may or may not be true, but I was already very interested in the Richard Shaver material and got to know Dick pretty well. And it seems to be sort of a different chorus, same verse of the same song. I'm probably saying that backwards, but you folks get the point.
For sure.
So that's how I, discovered that aspect of it. But there are so many aspects of weirdness around Tallulah Gorge that, from my perspective, which is all hide weirdness, comes from interplay between what we call reality and other brains, BRANESMOUSE. No, wrong song. Did you know that some of the Musketeers are still alive?
Yeah, wasn't Britney Spears one?
No, it was.
That's Mickey Mouse Club. My bad.
Yeah, Miley Cyrus was in the Disney stable, but so were a lot of people. Kurt Russell was a Disney kid, but he was not a Musketeer.
He was one of the first pilots to report the Phoenix lights over Arizona back in the day.
Well, you had to be either blind or asleep not to see the Phoenix lights. That was a very spectacular thing.
Fair enough. Dr. Greenfield, did you ever hear anything about an alleged river, or I guess I should say falls monster, some sort of like giant snake-like being in some of these tales you were hearing about Tallulah Falls?
Yeah, I didn't. There are people who are fans in ufology extended through that are into the, as they like to call it, the Ophidian current, who are, they glam in on snake lore, of which there is an immense amount. But I guess I'm much more attracted to, my first exposure was the Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries by W.Y. Evans Wentz. And that was a selection of the Mystic Arts Book Club selection of the month back around 1962, and I happen to be a member thereof. So that was my first exposure to anything other than Lucky Charms and the.
That book didn't happen to have a bunch of like really ornate illustrations in it, did it?
Not the version I had. It was from university books, and generally speaking, they looked around, and if it had some mystical overtones or undertones or just tones, but had no copyright, they would reprint it under their label, the university books, which was not from a university, but they were books. So there were no illustrations, as I recall. Anyway, that's where I got the bug, because had already been in ufology a couple of years. So, and especially in the Latin American and oddly enough French cases, when the alleged beings came out of the alleged flying saucers, they tend to be diminutive, little people, in the old sense of the term, not a polite reference to midgets or in these troubled times,
Sure.
Of course. So did your investigation of the Tallulah Falls area, were you able to uncover like any direct witnesses or any physical evidence related to the little people legends?
Yes and no. I mean, direct, no. People who had spoken with people who had actually seen these things. And also, I would say they've also seen, if somebody told me, well, we saw a snake, look, in this part of the country, to see a rattler is not uncommon, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would say when I was in the Tallulah Gorge, there was definitely more snake evidence than little people evidence, because I did actually see a snake when I was down there in the gorge, but I was completely unaware that there was any sort of reports that the Yunwe, and the pronunciation that we have looked through and we're pretty sure is the one, is Yunwe Junsti, and I didn't even know that the Yunwe Junsti was like associated with that area at all at the time when I went down there and saw all that. But
are you saying that Bernice McCullough, who was on This Is Your Georgia, the person who wrote the book for us eighth graders so we could understand the War of Northern Aggression, are you saying she didn't know how to pronounce it? Maybe she knew another Cherokee dialect, because there are several. The Cherokee are one people, but several different, sometimes mutually exclusive groups, which is a long story in and of itself.
For sure.
They have different casinos in different reservations that don't like each other. I prefer Bally's in Cherokee, North Carolina, which is right across the border, because
it's a Harris now.
aren't legal in Georgia. It's a Bally's, I believe.
It's a Harris, actually.
Even better.
Yeah, even better, right? A little mini Vegas in the mountains.
I think we're entering the Black Lodge.
You there?
I think we're having just a little bit of connection issues. It's just the Black Lodge trying to take over our souls. It's fine.
They don't want your soul. They want your voice.
Oh, okay.
And then they synthesize it and they say, well, I have looked into these things and I say, along with Edward Ruppelt, there's nothing to it, nothing to see here. Go to some other conspiracy theory.
Sure. Well, so when you were talking about that you had talked with people that had reported seeing little people in some way, shape, or form around that area, do you remember some of the accounts that people had brought up?
The interesting thing is it was never from locals. It was always, well, if you've ever seen Deliverance, the kind of people that came up from Atlanta to challenge the Wild Catoosa or to take pictures or whatever. And they sometimes claimed, and I had, maybe four different stories, which I did not record, unfortunately, but, I remember them well. They said, if you look up the sheer side of the, almost said canyon, the gorge, you will see a cave. And we have seen these little beings come out of those cave mouths and climb up the next, I don't know how, at distances, you can be very deceived about what you're looking at. But probably if they say they were little beings, they were little. But when they say they climbed just a few levels above onto regular land, which would have been, I think, on that side in North Carolina, it might have been a lot further than it looked like to the naked eye of Whitey from Atlanta.
Right.
Did I say that? Mea culpa, Maxima. I'm so sorry.
Well, I mean, the walls on the either side of that gorge are insanely tall. They really
Yep.
are. And you really feel it once you get down there to the bottom of all those steps in the gorge, because it's like, good Lord.
Well, after I heard like the fourth story, which was the famous one because it is quite a tale and was told me by the guy that everybody is scared of or doesn't believe exists or whatever, from my books, I was determined to either
Who are we referencing here, just for the listeners?
some Terry guy, as he called himself.
Okay.
But I'm not gonna pump that. Anyway, he told a really elaborate story, which was right out of the Shaver book. But it was elaborate. It was elaborate enough that I thought it was worth pursuing. And so I took an expedition with several people. And like his purported expedition, we went in armed, very well armed, I should say. Not as well armed as they were. But if there were indeed something equivalent to Shaver's Dero in this cave, and we found the cave and we got to it, I mean, we had a couple of spelunkers, and you had angry gun nuts such as myself, and a few other things that were useful for encountering the Dero. And we camped out on what passed for a campground back then. Actually, I just recently talked to somebody on the Reddit/Hellier group who very recently went there. And now the campground has restrooms and designated areas and all that. And of course, they saw nothing.
Gentrified.
It's gentrified. Probably not too gentrified, because there's even apparently a bridge across the gorge. I mean, the Flying Walunda risked his life, which he eventually lost in Puerto Rico, but he walked across on a tight wire across the gorge with no net. And now apparently there's a bridge across there. I haven't been there since I was there with William Breeze of the Ordo Templi, something or other.
Yeah. I saw where that guy went across the gorge there with his on the tightrope thing. And, I wanted to bring up to you last time we talked, but we were kind of focusing on the Brown Mountain stuff. And Austin, Alan, if you guys will both bear with me, I just want to very quickly breeze over for Alan. There's two accounts that I have heard firsthand from people that have claimed to see the Cherokee Little People. And I just wanted to let you hear these stories. I'll make it very quick, but they're wild. And I thought that you might like hearing this shit. When I was a kid, my parents were friends with this guy named J.R. Sutton. He had some land out in Barnardsville, North Carolina. He had like a donkey out there. He gets a phone call from the guy that lives across the way from him one day, and he says, "Hey man, there's like some kids out there playing on your donkey. You might want to go like shoo them off." So he goes walking out in the yard, and he says to me, and I was a kid when I heard this, and my mom and dad, I mean, they talked about this quite a bit, but he says he gets out there to where his donkey is, and he sees these kids riding on the damn thing. And he says he gets up close and he started to realize that a couple of them had full-grown beards. And he said that it looked like their clothes were kind of like little patchwork together. And the closer he got to him, they recognized that he was there. And he said they were down and in the grass and gone before you could fart. And then the other crazy story that I heard is from this guy who used to own this set of cabins out there called Greystone Estates in Weaverville, North Carolina. And this guy, I know this sounds wild too, but this guy is sitting there and he's literally like coughing blood up into a napkin because he has lung cancer and he's like dying. And I just like happened to meet him through Joshua P. Warren, who I think you've probably heard of before. I was palling around with him back then. But me and Johnny Capps, this guy that owned Greystone Cabins, we just were having some whiskey and talking about stuff. And, the conversation goes on. He's like, starts just saying, he's like, "You're going to think I'm insane, but I want to tell you this because this is the truth and this is what happened to me." He said, "I was driving my golf cart down. There's like a little paved road that goes between all the little cabins down there." He's like, "I was driving my golf cart down to go take the trash out at some of the lower cabins." And he says, "I got down to the bottom of the hill." And he says, "There is a little man between 2 and 3 feet tall standing there. He looks like a Cherokee Indian. with long black hair, and he said he is standing there with his arm on a stump, and he's just staring at me with this shit-eating grin. That's exactly how he said it. Then he said it scared him so bad, he turns the golf cart around, hauls ass back up to the top of the hill, and he says, I don't know if this dude had a tunnel. I don't know if this guy had a twin brother. But he said, when I got up there to the top of the hill where my house was, he said that same little dude was standing there looking at me with that same shit-eating grin. He said, I ran in the house, I grabbed my gun, and I did not come out until my wife got home. So these are two stories that I've heard from people that have firsthand witnessed this phenomenon. And then we find some videos online where people of Cherokee descent are speaking very matter-of-factly, and it's not like a folklore thing. It's, I saw this little guy. So, I mean, like, what is your take on this thing? Because the more Austin and I have kind of dug into this whole thing, the more we're kind of like, dude, I don't know if this is all just folklore. Like, this might be like legitimate hominid situation.
Well, I think that it is a legitimate hominid situation. And the cases that have shown up in connection with flying saucers, UFOs, UAPs, UAPs, please don't follow the government's lead on this. They don't know jack. Okay, but those cases were seen by ufologists, particularly from APRO, at least unlike their rival NICAP. They were willing to entertain landing cases. They were against contact cases, but not landing cases. They could land, but they couldn't communicate. That was their rule. That has sort of died with those organizations, and even MUFON, the second most conservative UFO classical UFO organization, they're willing to entertain cases like the John Reeves case, or the what they used to call the Mississippi fisherman case, the Pascagoula case, and both of which I have personally investigated at great lengths, maybe more so than anybody else, not just to write a story out of my own curiosity, and also because I had connections with both locations, namely Brooksville, Florida, where the Reeves case took place, is just above Tampa, and I used to live in Tampa, and also was a favorite watering hole of my parents. So I was down there from my early youth on, mainly at Weeki Wachee Springs, where you could see the real live mermaids, because that's what people went to that. It was, if you've ever read Pynchon, that was another roadside attraction, among which in Florida, there are many, or there used to be before the interstate spoiled everything.
Right.
Fair enough.
And, well, there are no roadside attractions on the interstate by definition.
Got some alligators.
There's a Buc-ee's. That's a roadside attraction on the interstate, right?
Well, but you have to get off the interstate and go through the cloverleaf.
Okay.
It used to be a 2-lane called US 1, I believe, if I recall correctly. Anyway, these stories of little people come from all over the world. And lest you think, as I did originally, that they had sort of disappeared outside of the UFO-related stories in modern times, that they basically, the ones that Evans Wentz documented at the turn of the 20th century from the 19th, they go on a daily basis to this day. And if you want to get a reference to some of them, there's an excellent, one of the occasionally good sites on YouTube. I think they call it the Fairy Research Society's site, and they interview a different prominent person who has seen whatever they want to call them, you know, the good folk, the gentle folk, the meeting, the little people, every episode, which I think comes out every week. So, you know, the number of people that are willing to come forward with these probably exceed the number of cases where you have UFO-related abduction cases. And a lot of fairy cases involve abduction and have for centuries, maybe since antiquity, you know.
Sure.
Yeah, that's interesting because I know you kind of touched on this some with the crossover between leprechauns and fairies and the Cherokee Little People, and kind of looking at this through the lens or context of Passport to Magonia, which I know you mentioned was pretty instrumental for you. Do you see the same kind of underlying archetype that Jacques Vallée references in this book being something that's occurring with the little people?
Oh, absolutely. I think Vallée, in his work during that period, he is spot on. I'm not so sure now. I mean, scientists tend to rethink too much. You know, if they have something that doesn't fit the current paradigm, and he is the least paradigmatic. Is that a word? Is that a word, folks?
Yeah, it is tonight.
We'll go with it.
Okay, it's on this program, friends. It's paradigmatic that the term paradigmatic is paradigmatic. So I got to stop that because people think Greenfield is way too frivolous.
Hey, if they don't like you for who you are, then they can kiss your ass.
No, they can't.
They gotta find you first.
So when you were reading Passport to Magonia, did you notice there's a couple sections when Jacques Vallée is giving some of these contact experiences that specifically reference Tallulah Falls itself?
No, I did not, because that was prior to my taking an interest in it. Again, at the time, all I knew about Tallulah Gorge and Tallulah Falls was from school. They would take up a collection for the Tallulah Falls School and some other charitable institution in that area, because at that time, I don't know about now, but at that time, the locals were desperately impoverished. Probably they're more impoverished now, but
yeah, understood. I didn't really notice these references or little sections till I started rereading the book over the last few weeks, but I think you'd probably find them pretty interesting. They occur about a week from each other. One of them being July 7th of 1964, Tallulah Falls, Georgia. 9 people from 3 different houses, including Jay Ivester, described an object like a flying top. TV interference was also associated with the object's presence. It flew slightly at tree height and hovered about a yard over Mrs. Russell McKinnon's house. The lower part was bright and red, with 3 lights on the upper part. As it left, green lights illuminated the countryside. A powerful odor smelled like embalming fluid was noticeable when the police arrived. The next day, witnesses felt a burning sensation on their face and arms. And then this next one, July 14th, 1964, exactly a week later, Tallulah Falls, Georgia, Miss P. Upton came running home hysterically. While riding bicycles, she and a friend saw a low-flying object that terrified them. A strong, unpleasant smell was also reported. And I thought that was pretty interesting, especially as we're talking about the crossover between these archetypes of little people and these direct UFO contactee experiences, specifically because these contactee experiences came from a place like Tallulah Falls that's so strongly associated with the little people.
Exactly. And the reason I wouldn't have, well, I probably, that's in the catalog in the back of the book.
Yeah, it's where he's like kind of documenting newspaper clippings and contactee experiences that he's trying to find these archetypal crossovers cross with folklore.
Okay, if I'm fracturing this, Dr. Vallée, sir, forgive me. My doctorate is in the humanities and you're in the sciences. But when I met him, he had just written his first book, which was your standard UFO book of that period. You know, it would have sounded like Kehoe or Frank Edwards or other people who I also knew. But, and it hadn't even come out in French yet, let alone in English. And, but he did have a copy of the Galley Proofs, showed it to Jim Moseley, not the 3 kids, Alan and Rick Hilberg and Gene Steinberg. We were just kids that were there with Jim Moseley. Actually, he was there with us, but we'll, go with that. And he eventually, in one of his books, Belay, recounted the meeting with Jim Moseley. Nobody else. There was nobody in the room. But I can get above that. But the point is, up until Passport to Begonia, he seems to have been a standard UFO buff, as Keel liked to call ufologists. I'm afraid rightly so in many cases. So it would have been part and parcel of everything that Belay was saying in that breakthrough book. And it was the last nail in the coffin for me of the standard theory about flying saucers from Mars, Alpha Centauri, other galaxies, which is quite a leap, and made me much more inclined towards the notion that he was trying to say, which is the literature in folklore about little people and the literature in ufology about leprechaunish beings are the same thing seen in different cultural contexts. And I think that is the case. And the more years that have gone by, the more I have tended to accumulate modern cases. I must say, much more so than UFO lore. I tend to get the cases second or third hand. People don't want to talk about having seen the little people with one group of people that are exceptions, who don't give a damn what you think. And that is people that have done certain psychedelic drugs. And I wouldn't say invariably, but the deep trip people from the very beginning of the LSD fad of the 1960s were always seeing the little people. And that's even more true of the current shamanic ayahuasca type alleged trips that people have. I think these cases are all the same thing. And from something like 1966 on, which I think was the same year that Passport came out, I've been on that page and have added to it where I can. The Cipher of the Euphonauts was my contribution in a big edition. And then linking it to certain interpretations of quantum mechanics is also something that I have, so to speak, imported into ufology to say that if any of the many worlds type interpretations of quantum mechanics is true, although the official story is other membranes cannot be, they are right here, not in some other galaxy or some other solar system or some other physical place, but right here in the room with you and you and you. Uncle Sam wants you.
Uncle Sam wants you for Hell's Legions.
So when you're talking about these caves that were in the Cherokee legends, do you see them as some sort of like almost liminal space where it's almost like a gateway or almost a portal like you described in the Brown Mountain episode that can almost leak through into this other dimension?
I think there are two kinds of portals from which these things come and to which they go back, which accounts for the fact that, for example, and this is just, an example, the Men in Black would fall in the same category almost. The Bigfoot cases, they're very real when people see them. And they go hunting for a physical, I don't know what they think it is, a Denisovian, just hairy beings that live in the backwoods. Which I've met a few of those, and they're just people that don't have good hygiene. But the Bigfoot / Sasquatch, and even including the Yeti in Asia, and I suspect a bunch of others that we are not as well informed in the West as perhaps we should be. They never seem to be trapped or caught or, God forbid, killed, or nor are there droppings, which one could presume these naked, shaggy creatures do have droppings, because if they are mortal, regular creatures from our own reality, just like the great apes, especially gorillas, are known for fouling their own nests and then leaving, sort of like medieval counts and dukes and so forth. They foul up their castle to the point they couldn't stand it anymore, and then they built a new castle.
What a time to be alive.
Yes, it was a great time.
So, talking a little bit about some of these alleged caves in the Tallulah Falls area that almost act as a gateway or portal. I read one Cherokee legend that they referred to this cave as the happy hunting ground because everyone that went in there never returned.
It didn't come out. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
so they assumed happy hunting from there on. But there was one legend of a person that did come in and return, but it was a complete missing time experience. I think they felt they were only gone for an hour. In reality, they were gone for over 10 years. Do you see this as some type of similarity as like what Lael experienced going into the Brown
like
Mountain?
Lael experienced. He wasn't gone for 10 years, but
Yeah.
another person who never claimed to have been taken to other planets or what he took to be other planets. If you don't see me, folks, it's the men in black. It isn't me. I'm not doing anything to the picture.
Let us enjoy our podcast, you men in black bastards. Man, they are really messing with him tonight.
They took that personal. I don't think they like being called bastards.
Sorry, men in black. Bring Alan back, please.
It just turned my camera off.
Man,
And
that is
again,
bizarre,
I'm not
dude.
even touching my equipment, and I don't know. It does happen to
wild.
me a lot, and it usually is when we're talking about the stuff they don't want you to hear, so that you're tuning into the static rather than tuning into the subject that's being discussed. So, it does coincide. I was going to tell you about my expedition 20 years ago to find the caves in Tallulah Gorge. I already told you that I think they're well up the side of the cliff. Is that the right term to use? Up the
I think
side
so,
of the gorge, which is very sheer. And on a previous trip, I had identified what looked to me from the ground, actually what looked to me from the viewing place overlooking the gorge. You can't really see it if you're down in the gorge because it is flush with that cliff face and well up the cliff face. Not at the top, but somewhere about 3/4 of the way up. So I got together a group of people, and the people that I got were mostly my students and a couple of spelunkers, because I will not do caving stuff. I mean, a couple of years ago, I forgot that I was now a senior citizen and did what we will call my last caving, as I climbed onto a shelf, and I was with a couple of spelunkers. But the fact is, the shelf, probably sandstone, broke, and I thought I just fell a few feet because to the next sandstone. Anyway, I won't dwell on that, but I was doing what I do, and what I've done at the bottom of the canyon or the gorge as well. I'd go right arm, left arm, works. Right foot, left foot, works. Right head, left head. Let's rephrase that. And if it worked, I got up. If it didn't, I said, help. Because if you're down in Tallulah Gorge and can't move, man, you're in the shit. You know what I mean?
I could imagine. Yeah, I mean, I know it's known for its like intense, just natural, rugged atmosphere.
And what they don't tell you really is how slippery it is down there, because once they dammed up the river, there is a trickle that runs down the gorge now, and it's
Uh-huh.
on rock. So if you've ever walked on rocks that are constantly flooded with small amounts of water, and it gets very slippery. And I've only fallen that one time down there. Anyway, on this expedition, I had spelunkers, but I certainly didn't have mountain climbers with me because I didn't even think about that. And at the time, the only mountain climbers I knew had a reputation for falling. So it was not where I wanted to go. So I had ballyhooed this in order to get people to come with me. And I don't know if this was before or after the original edition from Illuminate Press of Secret Cipher of the UFOnauts had come out. But it was right around that time. So it was sometime in the 1990s. And as I said before, we camped out. And then the next day, we viewed the area from the lookout point, I guess you would call it. And I said, you see that shadowy area about 3/4 of the way up the side of the gorge? That is what I think is the cave that people are talking about, that they have seen the little people, or what they take to be the little people, in or around. And if you don't go into it, the thing that I had thought earlier, that maybe it was the well-known phenomena that miners will tell you about of toxic gases in mine shafts. That's the whole thing with taking canaries into the mine.
Yeah.
They're very, very sensitive, and they'll drop dead long before people do.
Yeah.
So it wasn't for the music. Canaries don't really sing anymore since they took the marijuana seeds out of their feed. I have an amusing story about being naive when I was a little kid and growing some of those seeds for a terrarium, but that's
Nice.
really off subject. I didn't know one seed from another. I just wanted a terrarium. So after I identified the place, I said, okay, to get there, we're going to have to do some climbing, or at least do photography of that area. But what I haven't mentioned is that my youngest son, at that time about 4, Randall Greenfield, was with me. And, I'd taken him along so he could just do the camping experience and all that. So my stalwart companions were doing there were no steps or anything in those days. You just climbed down from ledge to ledge on the nearest. Yeah. And they were all getting towards the bottom, and I said, okay, Randall, I'm going to have to carry you. We got down to about a third of the way down, and he got heavier and heavier and heavier, and I realized I might make it to the bottom, but I would have to leave my son there because I could never get back up. So I said, let's just sit on this ledge here and wait for them to come back, if ever. And that's as far as I got. But they told me that they hadn't seen any indication of anything. And I don't know of anybody other than that person we won't mention that set out to find these things and finds them. It's people who happened across them that see them. Now, some of these people, including people that I have talked to, went there to see the spirits, the beings, the little people, whichever, and do. I very recently, there's a lot of stuff if you bother to go to the Reddit/Hellier page. A lot of the devotees there are really, really for real. And I I've met some very interesting people through that, and one of them had that type of experience in the modern, more gentrified Tallulah Gorge, and
Wow.
which kind of proves to me that gentrification doesn't mean you don't have, in a gentrified neighborhood, if you build a new house where an old house was haunted, chances are the new house will be haunted. In other words, the two types of portals are natural portals, which seem to coincide with ley lines crossing, which is where people built back in the day, pagan temples, then churches, or whatever, or just monuments like the late deceased Georgia Guidestones and other memorials or important locations. Those are natural portals and they don't go away. But I do think that the denizens of of otherwhere, they open portals and they tend to do it using some technology that we don't yet understand, but which I predict we will eventually. I mean, new physics has postulated that these membranes exist, but we can't touch them. I think on the other side of these membranes, they have some kind of technology of the sacred, so to speak, on their side and are able to freely move across. And of course, I myself have, and I'm not the only one, this is not my invention. This is Dr. D's invention, if such, or probably Edward Kelly's invention going back to Elizabethan times. You can, using Enochian magic, open and close a portal. Unfortunately, a lot of people that know how to do that neglect to close them, and stuff keeps coming through. But those are what I would call technical, sacred technical portals. And they are porous and go both ways. So you'd best close it when you're done with it.
Yeah, fair enough. Do you think that there's geological or environmental factors that play into where these portals can exist? Any commonalities between areas?
They tend to favor high in mountains or down in caves or caverns or even mines. And mines, of course, are human created.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah,
that is where the crossover between naturally occurring portals, such as I was mentioning, that seem to be at the convergence of ley lines, and ley lines in turn seem to be something that in primordial times, shamanic people or whatever, they were attuned to the telluric energies that crossed at that point and would build oracle centers and so forth at those particular points. But also, if I'm correct that the denizens of otherwhere or fairy or Magonia, or call it what you will, have the technology, and I'm using that term very loosely, techno-magic would be probably a better way to describe it.
fair.
They don't want them to be so much open from this side as from their side. So what they do is they put them in obscure locations. Abandoned mines. You can ask my friends, the Newkirks, about exploring that particular approach. Caves and caverns, very common, and I think that was what was actually going on with Richard Shaver and a lot of other people, but they thought they were, entering the inner caverns of the earth. I think they were entering somewhere else through a cave or on mountaintops. And in the case of mountaintops, what do caves and mountaintops have in common? They are rarely visited. That is, you're not in Midtown Manhattan on a busy day. You're in a place where people come in ones and twos, if at all.
Yeah.
Some of them, like the vast system under Appalachia, The Mammoth Cave system, a good portion of it is unexplored. And I used to do a little exploring around Bat Cave, North Carolina.
Yeah, out near Chimney Rock.
Right. There is a civilized level of the cave where they have lights, and it's sort of like going to Ruby Falls in Chattanooga, which I went to with my mother, when I was a kid. So that is real civilized. But underneath that are level upon level upon level that are basically unexplored and not permitted to touristas, as I don't think any of these locations that have a tourist value, they don't want people having a reputation for getting lost for going to see Ruby Falls or Bat Cave. But under Bat Cave, there are levels that haven't even been broached by spelunkers. So that would be an ideal place to put a portal which is semi-permanent, but is generally only used by the little people, the giants, the big feet, Bigfoots, whatever. Bigfootim, I'll do the Hebrew.
There you go.
And therefore, that would be a good place to do it. And so would mountaintops for similar reasons, which is why Yetis are seen at high altitude and people disappear in deep forests. And I mean, all of these things involve, the common denominator is places where you don't find a lot of people, if any. And
Understood.
That's the deal there, I think.
Yeah. You know, I've been thinking about a lot of different random things recently. You know, we've talked about the little people's ability to potentially use some sort of, as you're kind of talking about it being like a technological / magic. One thing that came to mind when you were talking about the Sasquatch stuff, as I was reading up, and we were doing an episode about the Thomas Divide recently, which is another area near Cherokee where Brown Mountain Light-esque kind of phenomena is supposed to take place. And I was reading up about the folklore of the giant Judaculla in the Cherokee folklore. And what was so funny is it had been a minute since I had really looked into what the actual descriptions of what Judaculla was supposed to look like. But don't you think it's kind of weird that he's described as a roughly 7-foot tall man covered in hair? I was like, that's a little bit on the nose there. And then another kind of parallel that I kind of wanted to draw, because you were talking about these UFO sightings being a bit synonymous with, you know, certain aspects of the little people. Well, one of the cases that I was that I found while I was researching for some of these episodes about this was one that had taken place up in Canada. And these dudes had apparently just, they were doing what people do out there. You know, they were just going out in the woods, having a bonfire, having a couple of beers. And they said that they'd been drinking beer for about 2 hours, and it was 3 guys, and said one of them went over into the woods probably to take a leak. And he said he ends up hearing something rustling in the weeds. And he sees this little man kind of hunched over, and being a genius like this guy was, he kicks the little creature. And apparently the little creature goes flying off into the brush. And then there was some sort of, you know, ailment that he began to experience that apparently, you know, overtook him for quite some time. Now, the parallel that I'm trying to draw with some of the common UFO activity is, I think if we all had a quarter for every time we heard an experience where this happened, we could all retire. But the idea of UFO comes down, little people exit craft, they are holding some kind of rod, or when they are approached, there is this small rod-like device that appears, and then instantaneously, whoever is witnessing this is just frozen, cannot move whatsoever.
Absolutely.
You know, I think it would be safe to ponder that whatever this is, you know, they always say that technology is at its best when it's invisible. You know, technology is best used when it seems like magic. And whatever this is, you know, this being able to disappear, hex people, I mean, I don't feel like the parallels are too different between these two things.
Oh, yeah. I think that there is a circle of people in what we might call the magic/ufology community that uses terms like technicians of the sacred. And
Sure.
there's, for fans of Babylon 5, they have the term technomage, which is they are, a technomage is thought of as a magician in the traditional sense of someone who has the power to invoke, fill in the blank, whatever it is. But they're actually doing it through comprehensible technological means. I think the truth is somewhere in between, that there is, if parapsychology had ever been well-funded, and the only well-funded ones that I know of was CIA funded at Stanford, what used to be called Stanford Research Institute. I think the name has changed because they don't want to be associated with the university. And by the guy that Chester Carlson, that created the Xerox machine and established a chair at the University of Virginia. And they do great work in academic parapsychology and a lot of field work, notably by Jim Tucker and the late Ian Stevenson, who he lived a long life and was a world traveler to accumulate important cases. His major interest was spontaneous reincarnation cases, as distinguished from hypnotic regression, which I think is more like induced memories.
Well, there's a lot of that supposedly going on in ufology still today, which I've always been pretty skeptic of. But you talk about spontaneous reincarnation. Man, if that ain't Doctor Who, then I don't know what it is.
Yep. Or in this case, Dr. What?
Dr. Huh?
What you say? Came out of a police call box and you look different all the time.
He was flying around in a porta-john. They called it the Turdus.
Oh, gosh, we're going to go for Doctor Who humor.
But on that note, I will say, unfortunately, we are coming a bit to a close with our time, so I'll pass it over to Austin. Austin, did you have anything else that you wanted to book in our conversation with Dr. Greenfield here?
I mean, really, I'd kind of just jump back and say, if you felt that there was some sort of message to be taken away from the presence of the Cherokee Little People, what would you say that would be?
First of all, I have increasingly over time come to believe that one of the areas of expertise rarely invoked, you have, Dr. Hynek and astronomy as a means of understanding UFO cases. You have academic parapsychology, not much of it, but the notion that comes out of psychiatry and psychology, etc. You have a lot of people who are into the exposure any day now thing, coming out of the nuts and bolts of the space programs, whether it's from SpaceX or from NASA or from the European Space Agency, or China or Japan, places that, those are material programs, and they tend to see this stuff, that people coming out of that, in terms of mechanical devices from other worlds. And the thing that I rarely see is some kind of expertise in what is an academic discipline, although it also has a popular following, which is a folklorology. That is experience with dealing with folklore on its own terms. Folklore is not synonymous with untrue tales or anything of that sort. It's synonymous with what ordinary people do to account for the inexplicable in their daily lives. And the only person that I've ever known who was academically qualified to do that was Gray Barker, the much maligned, and my friend Gray Barker, who was not only a folklorologist, but he was right in the thick of all of the weird things going on in Appalachia because he was a resident of Appalachia. So someone who either is schooled in folklorology or makes it their business to try to understand folklore, including Native American folklore, but also including Appalachian folklore, European folklore, whatever, because the little people are the folklore of folk cultures around the world. And if you don't understand that that has, to switch over to the psychology part or the Jungian psychology part of it, an archetypal basis, which doesn't mean untrue. It means true, but perhaps involving something that is perennially true rather than something that is just an individual case to be taken individually. And that's another, proof of Valet's original argument in Passport.
Sure.
So take the Cherokee myths, and they're not just confined to the Cherokee. They're all over the Americas among indigenous peoples. So take them seriously, but also take them to be, in many cases, third, fourth, fifth hand. On the other hand, if you follow some of the stuff on phantoms and monsters, which I do pretty much on a daily basis, the stuff coming out of the Navajo Nation today, which is, I'm not sure if it's the largest Native American reservation, but it's certainly one of the largest. I mean, it's pretty much most of northern Arizona and I guess adjacent states in the Four Corners region. They are having these incidents like skinwalkers right now and reporting them because they are part of the modern world and part of the world that we have phones for. And these things are reported spontaneously when they're hot, when they've just happened. And does that constitute folklore or does it constitute eyewitness reports? Well, the answer is both. And if you don't get the folkloric aspect of it, you're missing the breadth of what these stories are about. So, of course, from a very early period, I took the Cherokee stories absolutely seriously.
Yeah,
No doubt.
that was a perfect summary of that and a kind of nice way to wrap that and circle it back around. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, as always, we touched on the ghost stuff. We could maybe do an episode down the road about that. The skinwalker stuff, that's a whole bag of cats. I am one of the few who has been fortunate enough. I was actually just at Skinwalker Ranch this past September. I pal around with Dr. Travis Taylor every once in a while, and man, the stories that guy can tell you are pretty wild, but it's always interesting to hear his perspective because he really does truly try to approach this from the same way that he approaches like being an actual rocket scientist. He is a wild animal and I love him to death. But I tell you what, the skinwalker phenomenon and the whole thing, that is some truly wild territory. And I hope that we actually do get to talk a little bit more about that. But maybe, providing Dr. Greenfield, if you are into it, maybe you'll be so gracious as to come back on the show sometime because we love having you on here. Our listeners love having you on our show because, last time you came on, those people went crazy. So I just want to say thank you so very much for being so generous with your time and being so informative. We always love hearing your perspective. And, like you said, there's a lot of people out there that don't go into the mysticism side of it enough. So many people, like you said, are like, they're just all the nuts and bolts. And I think that there's a healthy amount of that one needs to have. But you got to go to some different sources and you have to seek out some different perspectives because the nuts and the bolts, they don't know everything all the time. And it's always fascinating to hear your perspective on this stuff. I mean, you're obviously incredibly well-researched and you're a pleasure to have and a pleasure to talk to. And you're just so fun. So thank you so much. And I'd love to be in touch again and let's figure out something even weirder to talk about next time.
The werewolf epidemic. I'd be glad to go on about that.
Be fun as hell, man. That'd be amazing.
Nice Halloween.
Well, yeah, dude, we can plan something out like that. Well, Dr. Greenfield, before you go, we want to give you the opportunity to tell people where they can find you, where they can buy your books, anything you want to tell the people all about.
Well, you can buy most of my books pretty much on any of the online book distributor sites. The most recent thing, the one I mentioned at the top of the program, I think it was after we were recording, was the Ritual Magic for the 21st Century. I think that's what they wound up calling it. I wanted it to be Alan Greenfield's Ritual Magic My Way. But I think the publishers frowned on that, or the distributors or somebody. I don't know. I just write them. But more importantly, I shouldn't say that. Yes, I should. I have my own view of the relative value of my stuff. I almost said my shit, but that's a double or triple entendre. I was not happy with the original edition of the Black Lodge book, the Secrets of the Real Black Lodge Revealed. I think that's the name they settled on. Because the Black Lodge interfered with that, not so much with me, because I'd already done my part, but with my publisher, and then with their printer, their proofreaders, all of whom were compromised. And the first edition got a lot of flack. It also got a lot of very, very favorable reviews. It was a 5-star review on Amazon. Anyway, I more or less twisted arms to see that a second revised and keep in mind, I haven't seen it, but I believe that a lot of the problems have been ironed out, and there's a new introduction by a most excellent proofreader talking about the history of it. And it's now in a shiny new edition, which probably at this moment is only available from Amazon, maybe the Amazon in other countries as well, Amazon UK or Brazil or Germany or whatever. But it's certainly available from Amazon, and it has a different cover, and the back cover is, at my insistence, filled with reviews of how good the first edition was, despite all the problems. But I would urge people, even if they have the first edition, to make it their business if they can at least get the Kindle edition, if not the hard copy edition of Secrets of the Real Black Lodge Revealed. Of course, there is one difference, which is not incorporated into the book, but certainly influential. I kept needling my publisher to send a deluxe autographed copy to David Lynch because of the association with Twin Peaks. It's why I insisted on the word real in the title, because Twin Peaks does discuss in fictional format the reality of both the Black and what they call the White Lodge, secret chiefs, in other words. And to my sadness, David Lynch passed away just months ago, a victim of emphysema and too many cigarettes. And I think he had stopped smoking, but I guess he stopped too late. Yeah, and that is a great loss to all kinds of communities. So please pick up a copy of the second edition, which has on the cover, so the cover looks different, and it says second revised edition, or words to that effect in the corner of the cover. And it's a whole different ball game. At least I hope so. I probably will never see a copy, because back in the day, when publishers would send you 20 review copies to the author, forget it unless you're selling to, Stephen King's publisher. He probably gets 50 copies, maybe 100, but I don't get any, and I'm not going to buy a copy of my own book. Maybe that's just vanity, but, it just seems wrong. So my other books, they're available from all the distributors, all the fine book distributors out there in cyberspace. And probably from your local bookstore, but you'll probably have to order it. I don't know.
Right on. Well, people, please get out there and buy some of the fine work of Dr. Alan Greenfield. I think you probably sold a couple of copies tonight, and our listenership has been very, very sweet and, being supportive of all kinds of different communities, and I hope that they will heed the advice here. If you guys don't buy Alan's books, I'm going to come to your house and I'm going to kick your ass. Not really, but please buy his books.
I'll do it really if I know who they are. Hey, I'm the Fuller Brush Man. This is Shanola. Now we're going to get into the shit.
Alan will find you and he will cut you.
With a katana,
Indeed. He is a master swordsman. Well, thank you again so much for your time, Dr. Greenfield, and I cannot wait for the next one of these that we do. This has just been so fun, and yeah, looking forward to the next one. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next one on Ghosts in the Mountains.
Oh! Okay, girls, put your clothes on. Okay. All right.